You're listening to Radio Lux Lucet, episode 58, and the title of today's episode is Memorial Day 2021. Well, hello, everybody. I'm Steve Matthews. Thanks for joining me for this latest episode of Radio Lux Lucet. Today's program is going to be a little bit different than most of the other programs that I do. I usually do a fair amount of commentary on ongoing, political or economic things that I think are of interest to Christians, and I think just to people in general. But today, I'm going to do things. Actually, I'm going to do things a little bit differently. I've got a little different program, just because it is Memorial Day. I mean, this is Memorial Day weekend, and today is, in fact, I'm recording this on Saturday, May the 29th. So it's Memorial Day weekend, and I hope all of you have been having an enjoyable Memorial Day weekend here so far. It's a long weekend, an opportunity to take a little bit of break from our routine, and maybe also to remember some things that we ought to remember as well. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. It's one thing that's kind of interesting so far today, about this Memorial Day weekend is how cool it is here in Cincinnati. We had our high was 55 degrees today, which is really unusually cool for this time of year. I mean, generally speaking, we get in to this time of year, and you're looking at temperatures probably at least in the 70s. I mean, that's pretty typical. But it was gray out. It was rainy, kind of overnight, and even on Friday, and now here today we've got this cool weather again. So I'm wondering if you say it doesn't really feel much like a typical Memorial Day. It doesn't really look like a typical Memorial Day. And the other thing too is I've talked a lot here recently about the cicadas. We've got our big 17-year cicada invasion going on. And we really actually started to really kind of get into the meat of it this past week. And those darn cicadas, they get pretty loud when you get thousands and thousands and thousands of them up in the trees in your backyard, and they can crank it up, and it's pretty loud. It can be sometimes hard to have even a conversation depending on where you're standing. The sound from those things is so loud. But the funny thing is, I guess apparently they are very temperature sensitive, because I was out working in the yard today, mowing the grass and doing all that type of ththem, and I didn't hear a peep out of so much as one cicada. I mean, they were completely silent. So I guess the cooler weather maybe made them a little less energetic. I was supposed to start warming up tomorrow. I think it's supposed to get in the 60s, and then back on Monday we'll be back in the 70s. So I guess they'll probably be back to making some noise again. But today they were pretty quiet indeed. So anyway, so I wanted to talk some here about Memorial Day, and as many of you know, I mean, certainly if you're from the United States, you're well aware of Memorial Day. It's an American holiday, and it's usually one here in the United States we consider to be a sort of the unofficial start of summer, because it always falls right at the end of May, and that's usually when, at least when I was a kid anyway, that's when school got out. Although I think I don't know, it seems like some schools are getting out earlier now than what they used to, and they go back earlier too. But anyway, we always went to school, usually like into the first week of June. But Memorial Day was always kind of a marker. That was really like when summer actually began. And when Memorial Day first started, of course, it's something that started back right after the end of the Civil War in the 1860s, and they called it Decoration Day when it began. And Decoration Day it was called that because people would go out and they would put flowers on the graves of fallen soldiers. And this was how that custom got its start. And over time, it became more of it wasn't so much specifically the Civil War. It became more of a thing with anyone who remembering those who had fallen in any war, regardless of what war it was. And the modern Memorial Day, I think, was actually made official and regularized by Congress in I think it was 1971. So that's really where Memorial Day comes from. And what I wanted to do is talk a little bit today, since it is Memorial Day, and since of course, it is about remembering. I wanted to talk a little bit about my family and tie in my family's history with Memorial Day, and I hope this will be something that'll be interesting to you. These are some men that I'm going to talk about here. I think who are well worth remembering, and they're people I'm certainly honored to claim as my forefathers. So it's my great privilege to be able to talk about some of these things. And the first two gentlemen I'd like to talk about here are William and Henry Bailey. They were brothers. They were Virginians way back in the day, and this was before the ever the United States was. This was back in colonial Virginia, and they were two veterans of the Battle of Great Meadows. Or sometimes it's known as the Battle of Fort Necessity. It was fought on July 3rd, 1754. And it was generally considered to be the first major battle of the French Indian War. And the French Indian War was a substantial conflict. It was basically the French and the English fighting it out for control over North America. So there was a lot at stake for both countries. And the battle itself, it was, as I said, it was fought on July 3rd, 1754. It was fought in what's today southwest Pennsylvania, near a town called Farmington. And without going into a lot of detail on this, there was a force of about 300 Virginians, and it was also about 100 or so regular British troops that came from South Carolina. And they were all under the command of a rookie colonel, a young guy, with just kind of getting his start by the name of George Washington. And this was actually Colonel Washington's first battle as the commander, as the one who was running the show. And among those Virginians were two brothers, as I mentioned, William and Henry Bailey. Now, in that battle, they actually fought. I had the opportunity last summer in August of 2020 to actually go up there with my dad and mom, and we went up to the battlefield. There's a park. It's like a national, historic battlefield there, and they have a visitor center and the like. And they've actually had a reconstruction of the fort, and it's kind of interesting. The fort that they built it on fairly quick order. It was kind of a rush job. They put this thing together, and it was a round fort. Interestingly enough, and a lot of people didn't realize that. I guess they in past times they've tried to have reconstructions of the fort, and they always kind of built it as a square fort, kind of something you maybe more typically think. But the fort, and in fact, this goes back to even eyewitnesses that were there at the time. Although they were ignored for a long time, and it was also in part from, I guess, some archaeological excavations that they did. They did determine that it was a round fort, and they have a replica of the fort that Washington built there, Washington and his men. It was very interesting to go up and to see this. And the fight took place. So there were about 400 or so British and American, together about 400 or so British and American troops there under the command of George Washington. And they were opposed by a force of approximately around 700 or so French and their Indian allies. And the French and the Indians got the better of the British and the Virginians. And the next day, on July 4th, 1754, the French offered them terms of surrender, and Washington accepted, and they marched off. Well, during the battle, I mentioned there were these two Virginian brothers who had come up, William and Henry Bailey. Well, William was killed in battle, and Henry was injured, but he lived. And in fact, Henry came back the next year, and there was a battle the following year that took place. And this time it was under the command of General Edward Braddock, who was a British general. And the British got crushed again by the French in that next battle. And Henry was wounded in that second battle in 1755. And apparently that was the end of his military career. I don't think he went back and fought after that. I guess he'd gotten the worst of it in two battles, and maybe enough was enough for him, which is certainly understandable. But William was killed. And when I went up to the the historical site last August, there's a visitor center there, and there was a plaque that was made, and this was back in the 1930s, and it listed all the names of the men who had been killed and buried on the premises, and one of those was William Bailey. And I'm going to explain to you in a minute why that's important for my family. Now, although William was killed, he was survived by a son by the name of Josephus Bailey. And about 20 years later, Josephus served under George Washington, only this time it was General George Washington of the Continental Army. So Josephus Bailey was a Revolutionary War soldier, and he died in February of 1777. Now, I've seen there's a copy of some kind of official Army record that shows his date of death and the like. So he died in February of 1777, very early on in the American Revolution. And we don't know at this point what the nature of, what caused that. I'm going to guess here. I don't know this for sure, but it would seem likely that it probably was not a combat death. Most soldiers back in the day, and I know this is even true into the Civil War and probably up until, maybe the last 100 years or so, even most deaths in war were actually not due to combat. They were due to, illness and, various other, things that happened to people in war situations. And I remember a few years ago, I went up to it was Valley Forge, and I took a tour of Valley Forge where Washington wintered one winter. I think it was 1777, 1778. I think it was that winter. And one of the things they talked about was that, a lot of these guys that were there didn't even have shoes. I mean, can you imagine trying to survive the winter in an Army camp in Pennsylvania where it's cold and snowy and nasty with no shoes? And that just is astounding to me. But apparently that was fairly common. And you can see why men would die in circumstances like that, because probably the sanitation wasn't great, but then you had severe lack of supplies as well, and just things that you and I would consider to be very basic, they didn't have. So whatever the circumstances were, Josephus died in February 1777, but he was survived by a daughter by the name of Mary Ann, and Mary Ann Bailey married John Matthews of Amherst County, Virginia. My family, you can probably get from the last name there. This is family here. My family were Virginians as well. The Matthews were Virginians. They go way back in the day. And again, the Matthews family came to the United States before there was a United States. But Mary Ann Bailey married John Matthews of Amherst County, Virginia. And John and Mary Ann Matthews are my 5 times great grandparents. So that's my connection. I'm actually a direct descendant of a veteran of the French Indian War and also the American Revolution. And interestingly, those are 2 generations of the Bailey family that fought under the command of George Washington. So, that's when I think about that. That's quite an honor to have. And it's always interesting sometimes when you see how your family sort of relates to history. And I think I've talked about that before. I know several months ago I did have a chance to talk about that on a podcast, but I thought it'd be something to talk about here again, just because this is Memorial Day, and we want to remember the efforts of the Bailey boys. In this case, it was William Bailey and Henry Bailey and William's son Josephus. William and Josephus paid the ultimate price in defending in defending the country, even before, in William's case, even before there was a country. So we want to remember and honor the work that they did. Now, the next man I want to talk about here is Hiram Bennett Matthews. Now, Hiram Bennett Matthews was actually the grandson of John and Mary Ann Matthews. And Hiram Bennett Matthews is a Civil War veteran. He was fought on the Union side. And he was 15 years old when the war broke out in 1861. And he tried to join up, and I guess they kicked him out because he was underage. And he went away for a little while. He came back and he joined up again. He was still underage, but I guess they took him the second go around. And at the time, the Matthews family was living in Hendricks County, Indiana. Now, Hendricks County, Indiana is just I believe it's just the county immediately west of Indianapolis. And the regiment that he served in during the Civil War was the 1st Indiana Heavy Artillery. And it's kind of interesting. It was known as the 1st Indiana Heavy Artillery, but the regiment he was in was also known as the Jackass Regiment. Now it's not what you're thinking. The reason they called it that isn't because the men were jackasses, but it was because of the mules that they used to haul their guns. Remember, this is back in the 1860s, and there wasn't a whole lot in the way of mechanized transport. I guess obviously they had railways, but in terms of hauling heavy guns across fields and roads and this kind of thing, well, you didn't have a Jeep or some kind of a vehicle like that you could do that with. You had to do it by some other means, and in this case, they used mules for this. In fact, I've got a picture here, and I'd like to go ahead and to share that with you here. Here's a picture, actually, of the 1st Indiana Heavy Artillery. And I don't know, for all I know, maybe Hiram Bennett Matthews is in this picture. I don't know that for sure one way or the other, but this was his regiment. And this is a picture taken in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And that's where they served. They kind of served on the sort of the western side. A lot of times you hear about some of the famous battles in the Civil War. It's always places like Gettysburg or, various, battle sites in Virginia, what have you. But, Bull Run. But this was a particularly, but he wasn't in that theater. So he was over down in the kind of the so I guess what had been the southwest part of the theater, the war theater. So this was a photo taken in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And there's a second picture that I have here too that I thought I'd share with you. This is a picture. And you can see here, view of the Indiana Artillery, Port Hudson, Louisiana. So there was a siege that they were part of, a siege of Port Hudson. And this is the 1st Indiana Heavy Artillery. You can see over here, if you can see that at all on the live stream, there's one of the guns. They call them Parrott rifles. By the way, and I looked up Parrott rifles, and sometimes you think of a rifle, you think of maybe something you hold in your hand, but in this case, it was rifled artillery. So they had the rifling inside the barrel of the gun. And what that does, what the rifling does is it imparts a spin on the shell when it shoots it out. And that spin makes it more accurate than if you didn't have that spin on it. That's what a rifle is. It's got that twist on the inside of the barrel that imparts a spin to whether it's a bullet or maybe a bigger gun like these, like what they used. And they were called Parrott rifles. And I looked this up one time, and I guess one of the things that was noteworthy about the Parrott rifles, and you can't see it as well here in this picture, but there's like a heavy band that they learned how to manufacture these I guess you call it a cannon. Maybe that's not it's probably, I would think that's a reasonable term to use it for it. But when these heavy artillery pieces, they would put this heavy band around the outside of the gun down near the breech. And what that did apparently is it strengthened the artillery piece, probably allowed them to use a bigger charge, and it kept the gun from blowing apart. And I guess it gave more integrity just to the structure of the gun. So it's kind of it was at the time anyway, it was a new and somewhat revolutionary way of constructing artillery pieces. But they use these heavy Parrott rifles, and they hauled them around on mules. So that was Hiram Bennett Matthews' war experience. And what I understand, I've been told this, I don't know if this came down through the family or what, but the 1st Indiana Heavy Artillery mustered out in January of 1866. And when Hiram Bennett Matthews mustered out, he walked all the way back to Hendricks County, Indiana, on foot. So, he didn't hop on a train, didn't ride a horse. Apparently, he walked, if not the whole way. And I think about that, and that just blows my mind. That's an amazing thing. One of the interesting things too about Hiram Bennett is he lived to be a pretty old age. He